The fracking abolitionist movement in Illinois is really just getting started, and this is a movement that is going to be growing. I mean, I see the beginning signs of a real citizen uprising here in Illinois, and I think as people begin to realize the depth and extent to which they've been cut out of the dialogue and the decision making, and the more they learn about fracking, the more engaged that people will be. You know, Illinois has such a long, venerable history of citizen involvement in all kinds of human rights movement, and of course, abolitionism itself is so identified with Illinois. It's part of our DNA here, I would say. And so when all of us school children, you know, visit Abraham Lincoln's home, when we go to our Capitol, the shadow of Lincoln kind of hangs over us. And so when Lincoln says things like, you know, we have to have faith that right makes might, not the other way around, but that doing the right thing leads to our power, right? And that we have to have a duty to do the right thing. That those ideas are with us now. And so it won't take long for people to wake up to realize that the world's largest, most powerful industry, which refuses to play by any federal rules, you know, an industry that's exempt from the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, Right to Know laws, all of these exemptions made possible through very stealthy decisions made behind other closed doors in Washington in 2005. So here you have this kind of outlaw industry that our federal government has very little control over. The idea that it's now going to set up shop on Illinois soil, you know, a place where people still are very proud that if they happen to buy a home that has a room in it that once, you know, a secret room that once housed runaway slaves as part of the Underground Railroad. I mean, when I was a child here, if you lived in such a house, you know, you showed all of your friends, and I don't know, it was a kind of a cachet, right? Because it made us feel proud of the role that we played in another great human rights movement when people defied unjust laws and at risk to their health and liberty, helped runaway slaves and helped dismantle a very harmful institution. I think having that as our story, our historical story, will lead us very quickly to realize that here we are facing another human rights problem. You know, whose air is it? Whose water is this? To what purpose can it be used? Is it not trespass to tunnel underneath our homes, our property, our farms, inject these tunnels and boreholes with toxic chemicals to blow up the bedrock itself of our state in order to enrich the fossil fuel industry and contribute to the ongoing climate emergency in a state where we know we're facing long-term drought from climate change, to then use our precious fresh water to further extract greenhouse gases from the earth. It will seem to Illinoisans as they wake up to be as much as an abomination as running our economy on slave labor. And so I foresee a new abolitionist movement springing up all across the nation, but really kind of headquartered here in Illinois. And Illinois will not be alone. Already the eyes of the world are on Illinois and the decision that's about to be made here as to whether or not Illinois' wisps of gas and puddles of oil inside of her bedrock is worth more than anything else, and that we're going to turn this state inside out to get at it, or whether or not we're going to build economic development, build our agricultural system, build our communities on a whole new way of doing things. And so in my mind, it's a moment like in the 1830s when my own personal Illinois hero, Elijah Lovejoy, stood up against slavery at a time when the slave trade had already been regulated, right? So we took a regulatory approach to slavery for a while. Remember, we had the Missouri Compromise. We had Maine would be a free state, Missouri would be a slave state. And then we stopped the slave trade, but the unintended consequence of that is each slave then became worth even more money. So investing in slaves became a great financial deal, sort of like real estate was in the 1990s. And so more and more personal wealth was directed towards slaves. Now we're going to regulate escaped slaves, regulate slavery emission rates, and cause slaves to be returned. We're going to have state-of-the-art slavery. And you know, and Lincoln's point was that a house divided against itself isn't going to stand. And that's still the point, right? And and Elijah Lovejoy, against that backdrop, then rose up in the 1830s and said it didn't matter how much wealth was bound up in slave labor. It didn't matter if this was a property rights issue. It didn't matter that all of us at that time were benefiting from slave labor, whether you owned a slave or not, because it kept the price of goods low, it kept us competitive in the world market. That all of those arguments fell by the wayside when you considered this was just a fundamental abomination. It was just wrong, and it needed to stop. And if it was wrong, it needed to stop now, not gradually, not phasing it out, not regulating it out of existence, but it just needed to end. Abolition, right? So he stood up for that, and so and therefore was assassinated in the free state of Illinois in Alton by a pro-slavery mob, pumped full of 5 bullets in the night. And yet his work and words lived on. And one of the things he said at the end of his life is, to his sort of fellow Illinoisans, is that this was now a moment for us as Illinoisans to decide our destiny as a people. And he said, is there a spirit of freedom that still resides in Illinois? And who will come up to the rescue? And I think those words apply to us now more than ever. You know, are we going to let our state become Nigeria? Yes or no? You know, and if the industry and the laws all say yes, what will we do as a matter of resistance? You know, will we insist on abolition? Will we say who will come up to the rescue? Will we say, does the spirit of freedom still live in our state? And I think those words are just as apt now as they were in the 1830s. The other thing that moves me about Elijah Lovejoy is that he was a father. So he had a 2-year-old son, and at the time of his death, his wife was pregnant with their second child. He saw a lot of interactions between slaves and slave masters across the Mississippi River in St. Louis. And what broke his heart finally is he kept his tongue and he kept quiet about it for a long time. But what finally broke him apart was watching children being sold away from their parents. And he had a reaction as a father, right? Because he realized his love for his own child was so great, and he could then imagine with empathy the situation of slave families being torn apart and being sold apart from each other. And so that's really what emboldened him. But of course, the irony then is that at the same moment, he knew that he was placing his own life in danger, and if anything should happen to him, then his own children would be not in a good situation. And so he wrote a lot of private letters to his mother back in Maine about this dilemma, this sort of paradox, that his love for his children made him more determined to redesign Illinois and in fact the whole nation. So it was no longer dependent on this ruinous institution of slavery. And at the same time, his love for his children made him fearful of his own fate, should he take that path. And in the end, he decided that he could not leave his post being the abolitionist post, that his children, his own children, had no future, that we were all being dehumanized, right, in a world with slavery. And so he made the ultimate sacrifice. And so I think with that as our legacy, and as we look forward, and as parents say, okay, our children need a future. They need a world with some plankton stock in it to provide us oxygen. The plankton are now dying. They're in trouble because of climate change. We need a reliable climate here in Illinois. Because we need pollinators to pollinate our food for us. We need the corn to be able to pollinate. And for that to happen, a specific humidity and temperature has to be just right in the end of July and the beginning of August for all that to happen. And without those things, then our kids won't have a future in the state. And so are we really going to roll out another form of extreme fossil fuel extraction in a moment of climate emergency when we know what's called for in this moment is to do the opposite, is to declare an end to the fossil fuel party and have us all, with all the ingenuity that we possess, redesign our economy and how we do things to align our economic system with ecological sustainability. That seems to me the moral task of our generation. It's the great work that we have in front of us. And so I would like to think, should I have been alive in Illinois in the 1830s, you know, I might have had a secret room in my house and aided in the Underground Railroad. But being a parent and a native Illinoisan right now, this is my task. You know, this is my task to say, we're not turning our nation's rivers into clubs to smash apart the bedrock, to extract something that's killing our children and killing a planet. It's a homicidal abomination, and it needs to end. That's the abolitionist spirit, and I think it's alive in Illinois.